Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, February 12th, 2016, and a reminder, Sunday is Valentine's Day, so get on out, get the cards and the candy and the jewelry and the flowers and everything. You're going to be in trouble come President's Day on Monday. We're going to start with a phone call. This person called in, has been waiting here, so let's talk with Matthew in Maryland. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Rivera. I'm a little angry about yesterday's phone call from John. I'd like you to give me a chance or at least hear me out. I'm a little disappointed, quite frankly. I've heard you, and not that I believe in these things, so don't hang up on me because of that. Somebody calls and talks about chemtrails, you dump them. I appreciate that. Somebody calls and talks about something silly or hateful, point, you dump them. They're gone. The things that John were saying, yes, they may have reflected the world view of the United States government at this moment, and I appreciate that and I get it. But the manner in which he said it and what he said, it wasn't put that way. It was one of the other callers that called in about the same thing said he was almost, giddy about that fact. And it really upset me that you allowed him to go on that tirade the way that he did. If he wants to call in and say the American government is doing, X, Y, Z wrong, that's fine, because I agree. But to wish the death of all hundreds of millions of Americans in nuclear fire that have nothing to do with, the crimes that the government is doing is absolutely completely wrong.
Basically, first of all, I agree with you, and I wasn't happy with where John went with it. But he started out talking about, actually identifying the war criminals and, bad things should happen to them, which I agree with. And then it kind of got out of control, and I probably should have pulled the plug or calmed him down, and that was my mistake because I'm always trying to do 5 or 6 things here at the same time, and I really didn't pick up on where he was going until it was already done. But overall, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that, I know he's, not from this country, and everybody needs to, live inside their own glass house. I am not going to cast stones at the governments of other countries until I feel like I have mine under control. Yeah, I can point out that, the British government or every government, it's the nature of government that they just do things wrong. We can all throw stones at each other's houses and, unfortunately.
Well, I don't think we can be ironclad like that. I'm in agreement with you from the point of view of the U.S. projecting foreign policy into other countries when our own country is in such a mess. But for ordinary citizens, I think the fact that the U.S. government is borderline dysfunctional should not inhibit us from criticizing, for example, the actions of the government of Israel, which certainly deserve to be criticized.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Criticizing a government is one thing. Would I like to throw all of the people in our government in a big boiling kettle of oil? Sure. And all the other corrupt members of every government on the planet? Absolutely. One big, giant, corrupt soup.
I think we have an active volcano over that way that nobody's using right now.
Works for me. But I just really needed to get that off of my chest. We all, I don't believe in the whole citizen of the world thing. We should be nationalistic, but not to the point where we can't see the faults of our own nation. We should all be proud of who we are and where we come from, but not to the point where we, wish harm on other people because we are nationalistic.
Well, let me give you the counterpoint, because I don't think it's really nationalistic. At this point, especially since 2003, the government of the United States of America has been throwing its military weight around and, killing a lot of people, torture, drone strikes, assassinations, coup d'etats. The U.S. government is behaving very badly, and I think the rest of the world, especially those nations that are feeling the wrath of Washington, D.C., have a very legitimate right to stand up and be angry about it. Now, how John expressed his anger, I agree. I let it go on too far, and I'll be a little more careful in the future. But again, there's a large part of the world that I probably would celebrate and dance in the streets if a giant asteroid were to come on down and hit Washington, D.C. I'd rather not see that. There's a lot of great museums there that I haven't visited yet. But You get the idea. Okay? Listen, Matthew.
I do.
All right.
Thank you.
Got to let you go here because we got a lot to talk about today. And a reminder, the Lady Claire will be in hour number 3. Our phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in the control room. And let's start with Syria, because the U.S. and Russia have agreed to a Syria ceasefire plan. Now, it's not absolute. Okay, the deal is they're going to stop fighting in order to allow humanitarian aid to reach besieged Syrian cities. At this point, it's pretty much Aleppo is it. And they want to have a cessation of hostilities within a week, at which point they'll talk about a more formal ceasefire. And this is pretty much what Russia was suggesting all along. So at this point, Turkey and Saudi Arabia have got 1 week to muck things up by staging a ground invasion. And Assad is already aware of that. You know, he's out there issuing a warning about what can happen if Saudi and Turkish forces invade Syria. It's just going to stir things up. Now, we're hearing from an article over in Sputnik News that Aleppo is all but gone as far as the U.S.-backed terrorist groups are. And once Aleppo is back in the hands of Syria's government, the window to justify any kind of an invasion of Syria on the pretense of fighting terror is gone. So they're running out of time, and the U.S. is trying to look diplomatic and polite, going along with Russia's plan. But I was looking at a photo of Lavrov and Kerry, and Lavrov's face basically said, I don't believe anything Kerry said, and I would tend to agree with that. Now, the U.S. is going to join Russia in this humanitarian aid deliveries by air into Syria. The U.S. is trying to posture that it cares about the Syrian people after 4 years of bombing them and their infrastructure into rubble. And Russia has made it very, very clear that the ceasefire deal does not stop the air campaign against the terrorist groups Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and al-Nusra in Aleppo. Russia is still very angry over this stunt the U.S. pulled earlier of sending 2 A-10 attack aircraft into Aleppo to blow up a bunch of civilian infrastructure and then try to frame Russia for it. And Russia has provided all the tracking and radar data, which was part of their agreement to peacefully coexist in Syria, showing that Russia didn't have any air assets over Aleppo at the time this all happened. So what we're seeing from the U.S. side is a lot of thrashing around. Let's try this, let's try that, let's do this, let's pretend that. And Russia is just step by step by step. It's chess against poker, and chess ultimately is going to win. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter is out there saying that NATO might join the U.S.-led coalition in Syria and Iraq to get after those gosh darn Daesh terrorists. And we know what's really going on here, because we have seen the U.S. bombing the Iraq troops. Oh, gee, we missed. Lousy aim. Sorry about that. What they ultimately want, and this has been part of the plan all along, they want to carve pieces out of Syria, Turkey, and Iraq to form a new Kurdistan as part of the process of breaking up all the large nations of the Middle East into little tiny nations that are easier to push around and bully. And that's also Israel's agenda in the region. Now, Britain is increasing their naval deployment in the Baltic to help the NATO build up against Russia. Those gosh darn Russians, we have to show them that we mean business. Russia came on back and said, you do know that all of your warships in the Black Sea are a violation of the Montreux Convention, right? And I'm expecting the leadership of the U.S. and Britain to say, we're above the laws, we're above treaties, we're exceptional, we rule the world. And, of course, that looks bad to the world. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, George Soros is out there flapping his gums again, screaming that nobody should be doing business with Putin. We should not accept him as our partner against ISIS. It really isn't up to us anyway. Syria asked Putin to come in and deal with the terror crisis. Syria did not ask the United States or Britain or NATO or any of the other coalition to come into their country and bomb the place into rubble. But George Soros is out there saying, Vladimir Putin's real goal is disintegration of the European Union. We have to keep the EU together in a big solid block, and Putin's making friends with Poland and Germany, and he wants to disintegrate. He's basically out there saying that the world is in more danger from Vladimir Putin than from all the ISIS terror attacks, which is, I guess, technically true when you realize that all those terror attacks are just staged fakes. But what's really going on over in Europe is very obvious. The EU is being torn apart by private central bank debt that has grown out of control, and the influx of all these refugees and immigrants has triggered a strong nationalistic surge in all of these countries. They want to go back to being my country, my Germany, my whatever. But Soros wants the war with Russia. So he said, oh, it's all their fault. You know, the European economy is just absolutely fine. Everybody loves the refugees, and they're hugging them and toasting marshmallows and having a really good time. Now, if you're my age, you're probably familiar with an actor by the name of Michael Caine. He's a very nice guy. I actually got to work with him once. And back in the 1960s, he was doing a series of films where his character was a repeating character being a British spy. The first one was the Ipcris File. The third one in 1967 was called $1 Billion Brain. And it was basically, the storyline was a billionaire who wanted to bring down the Soviet Union, and he was using plans that were created by this incredible computer complex that he had built, hence the name the $1 Billion Brain. And Soros is actually reminding me of this character, General Midwinter, who was played by Ed Begley, if I recall correctly. And it's a reminder that we should be very cautious about letting any one individual or entity acquire too much wealth, because they start playing God with it. And real, ordinary people suffer for it. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Les in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You were talking earlier about that humanitarian thing that they were going to send out. If I was Russia, I'd kind of be like telling them, well, how about if you just bring the stuff, because you know how bad if they're going to be dropping it, you know how bad the targeting is for the U.S. military.
Yeah. Oh, we dropped that case of TV sets onto a school. We're sorry. I'm assuming they're actually going to land the planes and roll the stuff off, rather than just, drop it from the sky.
But I'd be kind of worried, too, as whether or not they were going to bring the right stuff. Like, oh, darn, we brought bombs, not the food we were supposed to be bringing or anything.
Oh,
like that.
I used to have this photo on my office wall, and unfortunately, during one of the last quakes in Southern California, it got knocked off the wall and crashed, and the glass tore up the photo. And it was funny as all heck. It was this emaciated individual sitting in the dirt and dust, wearing a turban and just incredibly thin. And in his lap was a box that said CARE, which was one of the international, we're going to help everybody at U.S. taxpayer expense charities. And he's opened the box, and it's full of Baby Ruth candy bars. and his face was like, this isn't what we really need here. Okay, let's see. Looks like somebody's trying to hack my server again. There are people out there who just don't want you guys to know what's going on. Anything else, Les?
No, I'll let you go and have a good day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, we are seeing more and more reports coming out of Donbass about war crimes, actual outright war crimes being committed by the Kiev regime. And again, Poroshenko's been given his marching orders, which are to get a conflict with Russia going somehow, somewhere. And they're ignoring the ceasefire. They're ignoring the Minsk agreements. They're basically doing whatever they think it's going to take to get Russia to respond here. Apparently, Kiev forces are now resorting to their own improvised explosive devices. And apparently, one was planted in East Ukraine, in the Gorlovka region, and was tripped off by a civilian. One killed, one wounded. This is not a clean and moral war by anybody's idea. And all of this, of course, goes back to that U.S.-backed coup d'etat in 2014 that drove the legitimate, recognized government of Ukraine out of power and replaced it with a compliant U.S. puppet regime. And that was done because Ukraine did not want to merge with the European Union. They were getting a better deal from Russia. And we can't allow that to happen. Ukraine has to belong to us. And that's why they went in and did a regime change. And look at all the pain and suffering and destruction that has followed from that. And it's important to remember that these people setting foreign policy in Washington, D.C. have absolutely no sense of the harm they're causing. They don't care. They don't care. Ordinary people are just part of the chips on the board. They're absolutely oblivious to the harm they cause. I think it was one of the Barbara Bush, when they were talking about, all the children who'd been starved by U.S. sanctions in Iraq prior to the invasion. And she was out there saying, why should I waste my beautiful mind on that? She doesn't even want to know, could care less, wants to stay focused on being a money junkie. Now, there's a video out where a group of Russian students are calling on the United Nations to stop the aggression of the United States of America, specifically Barack Obama. And it's a very well-made video, and it's getting the message out there. And we've got a link to the story, which has a link to the video. There's now an English subtitled version that's out there as well, and it is going viral. And yes, the rest of the world understands who the aggressor is in this current rush to a world war. And it's not Syria, it's not Iran, it wasn't Iraq, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's the United States. Look at how many conflicts the United States government has initiated over the last dozen years. It's always the U.S. that's starting the conflict. Oh, but they made us do it, Mommy. They have terrorists. Their people are suffering under a cruel tyrant and dictator. We must go in and fix their country. We have to bring them democracy. That other caller was right. We need to reestablish democracy in this country because we've lost it. It's not here at all. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials here, and when we come on back, some complications arising out of the Brexit over in Great Britain. So we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from John in Barbados, who I guess wants to respond to the criticisms. And by the way, this debate has ignited strong passions on both sides. I'm getting a lot of emails saying John was overboard. I'm getting a lot of emails saying John is absolutely right. The U.S. is evil, blah, 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 blah. And everybody's, it's hit a nerve somewhere. Anyway, John, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, firstly, Mike, I'd like to apologize. I let my anger get the better of me a little bit.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. I do that occasionally, and I always regret it.
Yeah, but basically what I was saying was accurate. America, now the Anglo-American Zionist Alliance, is probably the most hated bunch of people on the planet. And yes, it does mainly feature within the governmental systems of those three entities. But what I pointed out with this rush to war is quite accurate. Russia is like 5 times the landmass of America, and any nuclear war will certainly incinerate the northern hemisphere. And people do not appreciate these drone strikes and particularly these A-10s that bomb those hospitals and claiming it was Russia. Not bombing the hospitals could have been a mistake, but blaming Russia was deliberate.
Well, they always blame Russia when somebody messes up. I still think that Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 was shot down by mistake because the pilot was trying to find Putin's presidential plane, which looked very similar, and they shot down the passenger jet, and of course the way politicians look at it, okay, we've got an incident, what can we do with it? We'll blame Russia for this. And they were off and running.
According to my theory on that MH17, it looks like from the debris that firstly cannon fire went through the cockpit to kill the crew so they couldn't make any emergency mayday calls, and then they just knocked it out with an air-to-air missile.
Yes, I agree. I've seen the photos of the damage, and we're hearing that this Dutch investigation is just blanket ignoring any evidence that doesn't support the desired outcome. It's a recognizable pattern. Americans now understand the official investigation of anything is just polishing up the lies.
Well, I mean, and the other point I want to make is that Vladimir Putin seems to be, if you like, more truthful than the American and British opposition. And, of course, the American and British opposition have to remember the lies they told before. Putin doesn't have to. He can just tell the truth as he sees it.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm ready to go quite that far. I think Putin, because he's been raised in a culture that is very heavily into chess, he may very well be lying, but they're going to be very carefully thought out, clever lies that don't give themselves away. What we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C., and for that matter, Wall Street, is just this chaotic jumble of claims that change from one news cycle to the next, and a big reason for that is they're all using ad agencies and public relations firms to do their propaganda, and these are industries that, by their very nature, don't think over the long term. You know, we're going to say candy bars are good for lunch this week, and then 2 weeks from then, the slate is blank, and they're going to come up with something else. And it's because of this that the propaganda coming out of Washington, D.C. has been so uncoordinated, self-contradictory. It doesn't have a narrative. Anybody who understands propaganda knows that you have to create a consistent, believable alternative reality to substitute for the real world. And our propagandists have completely and utterly failed to do that.
Well, I'm looking at other things like this presidential election, which is going worldwide, and the characters of the people involved. Hillary Clinton, for goodness sake. And even Donald Trump that says he wants to bring back waterboarding and worse. I mean, are these people serious?
Well, yeah, they're serious about wanting to be the president, and there's a lot of backroom politics going on. Right now, Hillary has just sounded an alarm to all the American people that they don't get to vote for their candidates anymore. It's done by party politics. And there's a lot of anger out there about how obviously the American people's wishes aren't a factor in controlling the government. And the upside to that is if we're not allowed to pick our own government, then we're not responsible for the bills or taking orders from them. They're not a legal, legitimate government if they were not voted into office by the people. And what they did up in New Hampshire, I mean, the corporate media is either ignoring that delegate swindle or they're putting out articles saying, this superdelegate thing's just been so totally blown out of proportion, it really doesn't matter, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in detail. But
I remember America when I was in the Royal Air Force, and being in America, having joint exercises.
Yes.
It's a shame. The country has just degenerated. It's such a shame. It was a great country in the 60s and early 70s.
Well, it was already starting the deterioration in the 60s and 70s when Nixon started his term. But being as old as I am and having grown up in New England in my childhood, I'm very keenly aware of the tremendous decline from when we truly were the greatest nation on earth, and we're not there anymore. We're absolutely not there anymore.
I think it's such a shame that it's happened, and I think it's designed. It's deliberate.
No, I disagree with that. What we're seeing is the epiphenomenon of people just getting into this idea of looking out for their own greed, their own power, whatever their financial backers' agenda. There's no coordination. And so everybody is grabbing pieces of the carcass to put in their own ice box, and all that's left for the people, are some bones and gristle. And I don't think it's by design. It's just the effect of what happens when government forgets it's supposed to be working for the common good of the nation as a whole. Any nation that descends into fascism, you see exactly the same thing. The rich getting insanely rich, everybody else driven down to poverty, the infrastructure crumbling and collapsing, products poor quality, toxic food. Every nation that's descended into fascism winds up in this exact same situation. Until they grab whoever made them a fascist nation and machine gun them on national television.
Well, I just want to again apologize for going over the top yesterday, but basically what I was saying is correct. I mean, the first caller that criticized me about British atrocities all happened before I was born, and I'm 72.
Well, wait a minute. You know, Britain got caught up in this whole use of torture scandal in Iraq. So,
Yeah.
Okay,
yes,
all right.
Yeah, they're being prosecuted for it, but, it's something I was critical of the UK government and its machinations, as I am as everybody else. But unfortunately, what really happened is mainly an American program. It does go out worldwide, I know, but it's mainly American. So it was America that I focused on.
All right, well, listen, we're coming to the end of the segment here, and John, apology accepted. I understand the passions got the better of you, and yeah, I mean, a lot of people are passionate about what's going on, and I think it was Kierkegaard who said that nothing truly great is ever accomplished without passion. So now's the time for us to be getting passionate and angry and excited over what's going on. Just keep it under control and direct it in a positive channel, which is what I do. I pour my anger and rage at the destruction of the United States of America into the website and the radio show. And I suggest you also find positive ways to channel your anger. But go ahead and allow the anger out. I give you permission. To heck with anger management. We have a right to be ticked off. John, got to let you go. Going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Great Britain, we're coming up on the referendum regarding Britain's relationship with the European Union. Now, the higher political echelons are all in favor of a full merger with the European Union, enslave those British people to the European Central Bank. The British people aren't so sure, and with good reason. They are seeing what's happening to the nations that are already inside the European Union. Between the economy and the refugee problem, it is not pleasant. And they're digging in their heels. In fact, this whole European Union merger is starting to look a lot like the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Great for the corporations, great for the politicians who are in the corporations' pocket, terrible for everybody else, which is why it's all being done in secrecy and election rigging. Now, a new development is coming out of Scotland, which is still very angry over the manner in which their independence referendum was blatantly stolen from them. And 60% of the Scots being polled think that if Great Britain separates completely from the European Union, Scotland should separate from Great Britain. So it's going to be very dynamic over there. Final little terrible statistic. Latest Department of Defense figures show that we are losing 5 times as many troops to suicide as to combat. What are they doing to those kids? What medications are they giving them that is triggering this? Remember, they hand out antidepressants and SSRIs like they're M&Ms over there. We had a veteran from Iraq call into the show and say, oh, yeah, they're just throwing the pills at everybody to keep you happy. But we know those pills can trigger suicide. There's more research coming out to support that now. All right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. James in Ohio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I've been thinking for a long, long time that as things get more desperate, that we're going to see some strange bedfellows as people turn more towards pragmatic ideas. And what I was thinking is, of course, it isn't going to happen, but it would be nice if and when Trump and Sanders are, screwed out of their rightful places as candidates, that they could iron out their differences and run on one ticket as an independent ticket, the anti-corruption party or something.
Well, I thought about forming a party to go with my Rivero 2016 campaign. I was going to call it the Necktie Party, but people thought that was maybe not such a great idea, so I don't know, we'll call it the Toga Party. But, you're absolutely right. The reason the GOP establishment extracted that signed statement from Trump that he would not run as an independent was designed to give them a weapon in case he did. But it's very clear at this point that the GOP establishment is not playing fair with Donald Trump. And I think probably most people would say Trump has every right to run as an independent, and he's got the money to do it. And if Trump and Sanders were going to run as an independent, I certainly will support their campaign. Because I've had it with the Republicans and I've had it with the Democrats. Frankly, anarchy is looking very attractive right now.
I mean, if Sanders was vice president, he could do some, vanity socialism. We could start by nationalizing the Federal Reserve, maybe put Gerald Celente in charge of the Treasury, and you could be White House press secretary. And I also thought it'd be a good idea.
I want NASA. Okay. Anyway, yeah, there is an issue, of course, and that is that under one of the amendments to the Constitution, and I forget which one, the president and vice president run as a pair from the same political party, because early in the nation's history, the way it worked is the winner of the popular vote was the president. The second place was the vice president, and very often it came in with members of opposing political parties. And it caused a lot of confusion. Now, the vice president actually doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. In fact, John Adams called it the most boring job in the government, because you basically sit in there as president of the Senate, and the only time you get to do anything is if there's a tie vote. The rest of the time, you just sit there, bang the gavel, and point at people and say, your turn.
Yeah, I think it was one of the independent candidates said that his vice president was going to preside over the Senate. It says something about presiding over the Senate. So,
well, that's what the vice president is supposed to do, because it's too serious. It's too time demanding for the president to do it. Technically, the president is the head, but the job has always gone to the vice president, all the way back to George Washington.
Mainly, I wanted to emphasize that the only way we're going to win over the top of the pyramid is to think on those terms of, strange bedfellows, of putting aside pettier differences, people all across the political spectrum, most people who are even in mainstream political and other organizations that affect policies of the government, they're good people. They believe they're doing good. So, we need to push.
Well, I don't think that's the only thing that we can be doing. Right now, I think every single American of whatever party you are a member of needs to call up the superdelegates in your state and say, right, you will go with the popular vote here. Because if you overturn the popular vote, it means we don't have democracy anymore. We've got an illusion of democracy, and if we don't have a real democracy, we're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to fill out the paperwork, we're not going to do what you tell us, and we are not going to sacrifice the lives of our children in all these pointless wars of conquest to make the bankers richer than they already are.
One more thing real quick is that with them eliminating comment sections on mainstream media websites and Twitter and Facebook, deleting comments, you take away people's right to speak. I think it would actually be a good thing, because maybe people will get out from in front of a computer screen and actually start going out and doing things in the real world.
Well, they could start talking to each other in the real world, because that's the one form of communication the NSA can't backdoor yet.
Right. Well, that's all I got for you. Thank you for your work.
All right. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over here to Alan in California. Aloha, Alan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Did you hear about the 33 ISIS supporters captured in Saudi Arabia?
No, actually, I have not. Please enlighten us.
Okay, yeah, they were. It's about 10 days ago, and then 9 of them turned out to be U.S. citizens.
Imagine my shock. I noticed over on Fox News they're doing a lower third. There's a new terror threat. Your daily dose of booga booga to keep you so scared you can't think about things like Hillary using the superdelegates to steal New Hampshire. They don't want you thinking. They just want you cowering in fear, because you are much more useful to them that way.
Yeah, I didn't know what to think of that, and then it had come out from Saudi news that I guess they said that some of them were working for the CIA.
Yeah,
which is no surprise, I'm sure.
Well, we know ISIS and Al-Qaeda are proxies for the U.S. I mean, there was all that confirmation in the Benghazi emails coming out of that investigation. There was a declassified official U.S. government document saying, yes, we're encouraging the rise of ISIS and these jihadi groups because they're going to be useful to redraw the map of the Middle East.
Yeah, it's crazy. But just one thing off topic, just real quick. Did you see that new video for the Sandy Hook by any chance?
The new video for Sandy Hook. I don't know. There are so many videos floating around right now about Sandy Hook.
It's a really good one. It's almost like a nuclear bomb for that Sandy Hook hoax. It's on David Wheeler, which is one of the parents going around with Obama.
Oh yeah, and they've outed him as a paid actor, and they caught him playing an FBI agent and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, for me, the video that really tells you this was a hoax was the guy playing a father, and as he comes out for his interview, he's laughing and smiling and everything, and then you see him go through the acting exercise to drag his emotions down, and so he can tell the camera about how terrible it was to lose his child. And I'm so glad the unedited version of that tape got out, because right there is all you need to see to understand that Sandy Hook was another in a long, endless series of government deceptions to get you to do what they want you to do.
Yeah, this one, yeah, exactly. And this one he's dressed up as an FBI SWAT guy, and it's just, I mean, it's red-handed right there.
And he doesn't have the proper patches. And the way he's carrying the gun, this is a guy who doesn't actually know how to handle firearms safely. It's just amazing. I'm sure it was unloaded. They're not going to trust him with a loaded gun, but, you know, he's handling it like a prop. And
yeah, the gun was pointed backward.
And he was carrying it by the magazine. The strap was hanging down where it could catch on something. I mean, he's obviously not a trained shooter of any kind. All right, listen, Alan, we got to let you go. We got to take our top of the hour break for commercials and news. I know we got another caller waiting on the line, and I'm going to ask you to be very patient, and we'll get to you just as soon as we're back from these words from our sponsors and the current headlines. So, aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2 here, and we're going to go right to the phone lines to talk to Bill in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'm calling in about SJ 29, that joint resolution for that Mitch McConnell proposed about authorization the use of military forces to fight ISIS or ISIL. And I called my Senator Langford and Inhofe both. But, I was really surprised. I got a letter from Senator Langford. I don't know. I just kind of vent on them, you know, when I call their gatekeepers. But anyway, he wrote me a very nice letter and, you know, said that along with that resolution, Mitch McConnell put this Rule 14 in, allows the resolution to be brought up before the full Senate at a future time without being referred to or reported out of the Senate committee. So, you know, we haven't declared war, right, since World War II.
Well, the problem I have, I mean, this you know, not referring it out of committee is part of the fast-track process to get this thing ramrodded through. The problem is we know that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all the rest of these groups are working for the United States. So what this amounts to a military declaration against the rest of planet Earth. Because if this gets passed by Congress and signed by Obama, and it probably will, it's basically the quasi-legal foundation for the U.S. to simply send a bunch of ISIS actors into any country and then go in and bomb them until they do what the U.S. wants, like they're doing in Syria right now.
Well, that's exactly my take on it, too. And I seen a real good interview of Lou Rockwell by Kit Daniels, and this was brought up, and they said that, you know, basically we're going to be the enforcers for the IMF, you know.
We already are. We already are. We're the military arm of the money junkies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, how can we stop something like this, though? I mean, is there any hope?
Well, like I said, I think that if there's a major economic crash and they don't have a world war going, it's going to pull down the U.S. government with it the way the Soviet Union collapsed, and then our task is going to be starting a new country in this land with a little more common sense, smaller, more restrictions on them. Going back to the Constitution and that Bill of Rights is a good place to start. A couple of small changes. You know, we don't need the Electoral College anymore. And then we had a few ironclad rules like no more private central banks. The currency will always be government-issued, value-based, non-interest bearing. And then we need to put some teeth in that Constitution saying any politicians who are going on out and trying to change things by chicanery, like claiming a certain amendment is the law when it failed ratification, immediate removal from public office and a lifetime ban on serving in public office. We need to have some teeth there. The problem we have with our nation right now is there are strict punishments for small crimes committed by ordinary people. But all these bankers on Wall Street who are destroying millions of lives with their fraud, you know, their bank pays a fine and that's the end of it. We're seeing some of the things that are coming out, well, like about Hillary Clinton and this email server. I mean, we've already documented something like 15 violations of Title 18, most of them felonies. And yet the government tiptoes around her. We can't touch her. We don't want to offend her. And the nation, the United States, was founded on the principle that everybody is subject to the law equally, from the guy laying the bricks in the building all the way up to the president themselves. The law is what's supposed to rule this nation, not powerful individuals. We've lost that, unfortunately. The nation that we thought we lived in has been stolen from us and turned into something very ugly.
Well, absolutely, Mike. I appreciate your thought on that. You know, in the email scandal, I think pales in comparison to the favor that the Clinton Foundation bought with our Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Well, that's a big one. I mean, that's definitely corruption and kickback. But I still think that we need to keep looking at that email server, because I think it's the tip of the iceberg of our nation's biggest spy scandal. And the fact that the government refuses to ask this, the corporate media refuses to touch it, the silence is deafening. I think there's a there. It's a legitimate question to ask. Nobody dares ask it.
Well, maybe the two worked in conjunction. I mean, I've heard those say that's the reason she had to have the private server for what she was doing.
Well, the server is what delivered the secrets to foreign buyers, and the foreign buyers would then pay by making a donation to the Clinton Charitable Foundation, which is legally allowed to accept money from foreign sources, and 40% of the money that's been paid into the Clinton Foundation comes from foreign sources. We don't know who they all are, because the Clinton Foundation actually had a branch in Europe that was accepting donations, and then it would lump them together and send them in saying, from the European office, which basically concealed from the record, from the paper trail, where the money originated. And again, back in 1996, Bill Clinton was authorizing the transfer of sensitive technology to China, and Chinese money poured into his re-election campaign. It's a legitimate area of inquiry. Anyway, Bill, I got to let you go. We got a bunch of calls here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Brendan in Northern California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. First thing, just want to thank you for all your hard work. I've been watching the Alex Jones and the INFOWARS, and the attacks on Bernie Sanders are just kind of a red flag to me. The viciousness, the venom is just over the top. And I had an opportunity to watch the Kaiser report today, and they did a really good piece on Bernie Sanders. I'm undecided. I was leaning towards Trump, but then I started thinking about his comment about rebuilding the military, and I have not heard any candidate mention waste, fraud, and abuse. If you want to pay for something, let's look into that, and there's a lot of money to be found. What do you think?
Oh, well, they haven't been able to find it. I remember on the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld got up there at the Pentagon and said, we've misplaced $3 trillion. Golly, it was there, the other day. We don't know where it went. We have an audit to try and find it. And, of course, the next day was 9/11, drove the story off the media. And the plane that hit the Pentagon circled around the Pentagon to come in and hit the offices where the audit was taking place. So somebody got away scot-free with several trillion or a few trillion of American taxpayer dollars. What I like to do is avoid talking about issues where the candidates are all basically saying the same thing, whether it's supporting the military or support for Israel and the rest of it. We need to focus on their differences, their points of differences, and there are some very powerful ones regarding Donald Trump. Anyway, Brendan, I'm going to let you go and try and squeeze in one more phone call from Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just want to mention that me and a couple of colleagues were talking at work, and politics came up. And this one lady said that she was voting for Hillary. So I said, I happened to mention to her that there's a good documentary online called The Clinton Chronicles. You should check it out. She goes, okay, yeah, I'll check it out. And she came back a couple of days later, and she goes, oh, my God, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
How dirty they are. And, I let her find out for herself, and she's convinced. And Yeah, she's convinced of how dirty the Clintons are.
They absolutely are. And you know what's amazing? Hillary supporters are all over. They're trolling the websites and saying it's all a fictional creation of the vast right-wing conspiracy, including Monica Lewinsky, even though that's now been acknowledged as having happened. Vince Foster, cattle futures trades, it's a fantasy of the vast right-wing conspiracy. But you have to admire the Clintons for how hard they've been working to convince us that it was all real.
Yeah. And another thing too is
well, actually, we're unfortunately we're at the commercial break, and so do you want to hold? I'll bring you in after the commercial. All right. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go back to Steve in Massachusetts. You had one more thing you wanted to say.
Yeah, just a quick point. I happened to go to the dollar store the other day to pick up some masking tape, and I. Taken back from what I saw, I actually saw people grocery shopping with carriage full of food items. You know.
Yeah, well, people are going to wherever they can, afford to buy stuff, and some of these dollar stores are basically they're taking the inventory from the supermarkets that's pretty much at the X date, and in some cases it's safe to go way past the X date. It's more of a freshness and taste date. But you need to be careful about anything that's dairy or meat. Fruits and vegetables can go quite a bit beyond the X date, and those are safe to do. But you do have to be careful.
Yeah, I think it is a sign of the times, though. I mean,
yeah,
going on, it just goes to show that the economy is not as good as what they say it is.
Oh, the economy is in terrible, terrible shape. It's sinking further and further into debt. There's no way out. We're just going to have to ride it down to construction. And unfortunately, our government, based on the last two times, is convinced getting into a bloody global world war is going to solve all of their problems, not ours. We're going to be paying for it and dying for it, but it's going to get them off the hook because that's what they did the last two times.
Well, I hope it's nice and warm down there in Hawaii, because up here it's quite cold, just to mention it.
Yeah, it is 82 degrees here, 45% humidity.
Yeah, we got -8 up here.
Okay. Send pictures, okay? All right,
okay,
Steve.
well, thanks, Mike.
Thanks an awful lot. Here we're going to switch over to Matthias in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, during the show, I was wanting to ask your permission to try something.
What?
I wanted to ask your permission to try something.
Oh, okay. What would that be?
I've got a list of topics, and just mention one at a time, and you comment and go next, and see if we can get through a few in like a few seconds.
All right, fine, sure. Go for it.
Okay. 4-hour show. I vote for that big time, and if anyone else wants to call in and vote for that.
Well, it's an idea when we start getting a lot more phone calls, but it's more than just a 3-hour show. It's hours and hours of prep to get ready for the show, and I don't get a penny for any of this here on the radio. This is all absolutely pro bono, plus I'm having to pay out of my pocket to keep all this equipment working. So I'm not enthusiastic about a 4-hour show. I could see where it might eventually someday be necessary, but I'm not eager to carve that much more time out of my day because I'm already overscheduled and there's only so much Michael to go around. I'm spread pretty thin as it is.
Okay.
Next.
Mom and Dad, you covered yesterday, is becoming politically incorrect. So I propose that to be fair, we switch the letters around, and from now on we have to say dumb and mad.
That actually would work out, wouldn't it? I was going to suggest momish and daddish. That sort of covers that gray area in between for all the PC people. Next.
Look what happened in New Hampshire when IDs were required for voting.
Yeah, absolutely. Sanders just surged ahead, but Hillary still stole all the delegates from him. Next.
What is the difference between 50-1 paper gold and fraud?
One of them's on paper.
Is it fraud?
Of course it's fraud. No other commodity would be allowed to trade at that degree of leveraging. And by the way, it's not 50-1, it's 500-1. paper gold contracts for every 1 real ounce of. Of course, it's a scam, and they're doing it to try and keep the price of gold down so that people don't pull their money out of the bank accounts with negative interest rates coming, or the stock market, and go into metals to preserve their wealth. And that's why they're also talking about banning cash, and when they do that, they will ban private ownership of silver and gold and other. In fact, they'll ban anything that is a potential store of value, because their mindset is all of that wealth belongs to them anyway, and they're going to keep it in the banks where they can grab it whenever they need it, and you are not allowed to have control over your wealth any longer because it's really just theirs. They just loan it to you at interest, and you're lucky that they allow you enough to eat dinner tonight and put a roof over your head. It really is the return of feudalism.
Right.
Okay, next.
Okay. If you are not born in the United States, you're not a citizen, but you can be naturalized.
Yes.
So if you are naturalized, that is the same as saying that you're not natural born, because if you were natural born, you would not need to be naturalized. So if Ted Cruz went through the naturalization process, which he did, that's the automatic evidence that he's not natural born.
Well, there's a huge amount of evidence that he doesn't meet the constitutional requirement to be the President of the United States. And the issue isn't whether or not he satisfies that, because it's pretty much established he does not. What's really alarming is that the GOP establishment doesn't care about the Constitution. They want to force Ted Cruz on you because they're absolutely scared out of their minds of Donald Trump. But Ted Cruz's numbers are beginning to decline because more and more people are realizing he does not qualify to be President of the United States. And I think more and more Americans are saying the time has come to drag this nation back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and remind the federal government, these are the rules that you are supposed to be playing by. And if you are not playing by them, you are not the legal, legitimate government of this land. Next.
Okay, last one. The hospitals that were bombed and blamed on Russia, the reason this can happen and the reason that the pilots don't get in trouble is because the governments are mafia crime families.
No argument from me. I mean, that's certainly the way they're behaving. And it may be that they always were. But they've been very successful over the last couple of centuries of convincing their slaves that, oh, no, we're a country and we're an honest government and we believe in these rights for you. And then, of course, we find out, no, the government just does whatever it wants to do. And all they're worried about is making it look good. I mean, that's why over in Flint, Michigan, when that scandal broke about the toxic water, the first thing the governor of the state did was hire a public relations firm. Anyway, listen, thank you very much. We went through your list here. We're coming up on another commercial break, so I'm going to let you go now. And we got about a half hour before the lady Claire gets up to us. A lot of concern, despite the happy ending on the U.S. stock market, which we knew they were going to do because they always do that every single week, is drive it into the green so the money junkies can have a relaxing weekend. But we're seeing all these articles about the credit risk at Deutsche Bank. It's hit a record high, and Deutsche Bank has a $600 trillion, more than half a quadrillion, in derivatives. So the derivatives are the hammer. They're the asteroid with a big number 11 on the side. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the economic news here, there's a breaking story coming out of South Carolina where apparently Donald Trump, in a speech he made today, came out and said if Ted Cruz doesn't clean up his act and stop cheating, Trump is going to take Cruz to court over the fact that he is not a natural-born citizen, because Donald Trump, as a candidate for that office, has legal standing to sue. This is one of the reasons why people like Donald Trump. He's talking about the things that we know are legitimate and valid and real. And that's why people are responding to him, and that's why the establishment is so afraid of him, because they have built themselves a castle built completely out of lies and illusion for the last 40, 50 years. And it's very fragile. and it could all come down. Getting on back to the economy. Despite the happy ending on the American stock market, people are still very concerned about Deutsche Bank's troubles, their exposure. They're trying to keep all these credit default swaps from kicking in because that is a problem they can't solve. If they just go on out and say, well, we're canceling all the credit default swaps, and then everybody's going to be upset. Nobody will have any faith or trust in either the European or American banking systems. Everyone's talking about a global crash. It isn't actually a global crash. It's a Western banking system crash. Even NPR is admitting there's a possible banking collapse in the near future. And NPR very much toes the official line about, well, pretty much anything. Morgan Stanley is going to pay $3.2 billion to settle their financial crisis charges back in 2008. And again, nobody goes to jail. And ultimately, that fine they pay is taken off their taxes. So you, the American taxpayer, get to cover much of that money. This is why Wall Street goes on committing crime after crime after crime. They make huge amounts of money. They have to give the government a little tiny piece of it as a fine. And that's it. They move forward, write themselves huge bonuses, and everybody's happy except you, the American people. Over in Italy, their economy barely expanded in the fourth quarter, casting doubts on the recovery. And at this point, we all understand recovery is a great word for the media to use to reassure you. It simply is not real. Italy's prime minister is saying the European Union situation is a sinking ship. And he's absolutely right, because it doesn't matter how they move the debt around or how they shift things around, the debt continues to grow. It's like having a boat with 10 holes in the bottom, but only 9 corks, and water's coming in, and you'll grab a cork out of one hole and shove it into the first hole in full view of the TV cameras and saying, we have solved the problem. But you haven't really. The water is still coming in because they are all enslaved to a private central bank which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. The instant that first pretty printed piece of paper was loaned into circulation, more money is owed to the bank than actually exists, and it never reverses. And that's why every nation with a private central bank is in serious, serious trouble. This whole clash of civilizations you've been hearing about for going on 14 years is really a war between banking systems. The Western private central bank model against other banking systems that don't do that. And the private central banks are ultimately losing because in the long run, a nation that is enslaved to a private central bank cannot prosper as a nation without private central banking cannot compete with them economically or, for that matter, militarily. That's why the money junkies always react to any government that breaks free of private central banking with violence. They did it to Germany. They did it to Libya. It's an ongoing, consistent pattern of history, and we need to understand that that's what's going on. Interesting. All righty, let's see. We have a phone call. Randy in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I was just thinking about, I remember when Ross Perot ran for president.
Yes.
And, Donald Trump, if he happens to go third party, would probably get the Ross Perot treatment.
I'm worried about him getting the Robert Kennedy treatment, to be very honest. I think Donald Trump's biggest obstacle to the White House is arcanicide.
Yes. I was just thinking, Perot had told some people that when he was running for president, he got threats against his family, and Donald has a family too, so that might not be, it could be some kind of thing where he could back out. But then again, I don't know about Trump. I think he might just go out and spill the beans on it.
He just might. He just might. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what sort of a president he would be, but tell you what, it would definitely be interesting times.
Well, again, the situation with Trump is he is an outsider. He's from the world of business, which is a lot more trustworthy than the world of politics. And that's one of the areas in which Trump is a little naive, because he comes out of an endeavor where your word is your value. If there's no counterparty trust, business does not get handled. And
got that right.
Yeah. So, all righty. Well, listen, thank you very much here. We're going to let you go. Getting on back here. Now, as you're probably aware, Iran has been in talks with both China and Russia, and they are coming to economic agreements to operate as an economic tripod, which is being called the Golden Triangle. And it shows once again that while the U.S. is making war, Russia is making deals. And that's the real threat to the American system, that the economy of the world is escaping their direct control. So, all right, here we go. I've got too many things happening here right now. Okay, phone lines are open here. Let's see, job calls coming at the Indy, the Guardian, and the Telegraph. Not surprising. Nobody likes a liar. Poland has accused the BBC of bias after the BBC claimed Poland is being Putinized. A little bit of propaganda going on there. And BBC biased? How ridiculous. I mean, they're only the news network that reported on the collapse of World Trade Center building number 7 26 minutes before it happened. All right, so let's talk about the candidates a little bit here. We have Hillary playing to empty rooms. We have Jeb Bush actually had to tell the audience, you applaud now. There is a major disconnect between what's really going on out there in the grassroots for these candidates and what the media is trying to tell you. In fact, NBC was running a lower third earlier today describing Hillary as the Democratic frontrunner. No, she's not. She tied in Iowa, may have actually lost, definitely lost in New Hampshire, but NBC's been given their marching orders. You will convince America she's a winner and they will side with her. So, Hillary has started copying much of Bernie Sanders' rhetoric on banks and campaign finance. She sees it's working for him. So she's going to copy. Oh, it's my idea. Really, I believe exactly the same thing. Next, she's going to come out with a Donald Trump hairdo, I think. And we're seeing articles all over the place like Clinton gets back in the game after blowout loss to Sanders. And the corporate media is either ignoring the delegate game or they're trying to say the superdelegates, not an issue. Don't pay attention to that. We'll give you a fashion show. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we're seeing stories start to surface in places like IntelliHub. Hillary Clinton approved arms sales, including chemical weapons to terror-supporting countries, after they paid her off through the foundation. This is yet another scandal that's growing up around them. Even Fox News is reporting that the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation records have been subpoenaed. There are now at least 4 separate federal investigations into Hillary Clinton and what she's been doing. She's not going to be able to make it all the way through to November. And because of her poor showing in the popular vote in New Hampshire, a lot of Democratic insiders are saying, we can't back this person. She can't make it through to November, and we don't care if she's able to steal the superdelegates. She's going to lose the general election. Especially if she's running against Trump, which is why Hillary wants Trump out. She wants to run against Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or somebody that she can steamroller over. It's a repeat of the Richard Nixon re-election. All right, let's see. Very interesting story came out regarding this actress who is a Bernie Sanders supporter, and she went out and she tweeted, I support Bernie Sanders, and she was immediately jumped on with a flood of posts saying, you should just shut up and look pretty. That's what you do. Now, keep in mind, these are Hillary supporters saying, shut up and look pretty. Where is this champion of women's rights when we really need her to be there? It's getting vicious out there. A lot of people talking about the superdelegate scandal. Now, we put up an article at WhatReallyHappened.com where we identified the New Hampshire superdelegates, 6 of which have committed to Hillary Clinton, 2 of which are refusing to say who they're going to back. And that's the reason for this confusion over whether Sanders and Clinton tied for delegates in New Hampshire or if Hillary actually has 2 more than he does, which is a slap in the face to the Democratic voters who expressed their wishes for the campaign and are being told by their own party leadership what you want doesn't matter. What are you going to do, switch over to the GOP? Would serve them right if they did. Now, we have already located contact pages and email addresses for some of these superdelegates if you would like to remind them that the founding principle of this nation is we, the people, choose who the government is. Now, article that came out of the Christian Science Monitor, no less. Are superdelegates Hillary Clinton's secret weapon? And it's explaining what the superdelegates are. And then it says, you know, it's really not that big an issue. Really, they're trying to trivialize this. They don't want you paying attention to this. They're going to try and convince you that Hillary is somehow winning the popular vote, when clearly she is not. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's the superdelegates. Faster than a primary election. More powerful than any caucus results. Able to steal the White House. And so forth and so on. And that's really where it is. Now, more government insiders are standing up to say, Hillary, you may want to quit while the quitting is still good. Because the longer she stays in the race and the more she pulls these kind of dirty tricks, the angrier Democrats are going to get, and the nation as a whole is going to get. And at some point, someone is going to go ahead and ask that question I've been asking. Was Hillary running an espionage operation out of the State Department, putting the nation's most highly classified secrets on that weak private email server to be picked up by foreign governments who then paid donations to her charitable foundation? So it's all clean and laundered and has the appearance of being legit. They're not going to be able to go from now through November without asking that question, and it deserves to be asked because of the 1996 Chinagate scandal. So we have people who are coming on out here. Carl Bernstein, who you remember from the Watergate, All the President's Men, is basically saying that Clinton has to come clean on this email server situation while she still has a choice in the matter. Because if she comes clean and she's truthful, there's a certain amount of political harm. If she continues to lie and it's dragged out through other sources, it's a lot worse. As Nixon himself said, it isn't the crime that gets you, it is that cover-up. Bernstein, in an interview on CNN, said Hillary Clinton has to acknowledge she has made mistakes on this. And he goes on to say, you know, the vast right-wing conspiracy didn't put the server in her home. That was something she did. Now, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who headed the Defense Intelligence Agency under Obama between 2012 and 2014, also noted Clinton seems to be the only person who doesn't understand how serious this whole situation is with felony violations of Title 18. And he is out there saying, for the good of the country, Hillary needs to step down and let the FBI investigation play out. I think the intelligence community may be sending Hillary a subtle signal that she's become a live liability and that she should step down before all the really ugly part of the story gets dragged into the public eye, such as the possibility that she was selling U.S. secrets to foreign powers in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation, because that is a scandal of such magnitude. It does destroy what's left of the legitimacy of the federal government, because they didn't catch it, they didn't do anything about it, and after this many months of asking this question, it's clear they're part of the cover-up. Remember what I said before, there are 2 categories of secrets in government. There are the little secrets that you use during campaigns. This person is sleeping with their secretary. This other person over here was a gay dancer when they were young. Little stuff that doesn't really matter. Then there are the great secrets. The secrets that are so horrible, they would destroy the entire government top to bottom. What really happened to John F. Kennedy? What really happened to Robert F. Kennedy? 9/11. Those are the secrets that never get talked about by anybody. Even Hillary Clinton's worst enemies are protecting her darkest secrets because they're worried about their own jobs. All right, let's see. Donald Trump is out there saying some things that I really like. He's out there saying Common Core is a total disaster. He said education should be controlled by the local community who knows what is necessary for the economic development of that community. And he says he's going to shut it down if he becomes president. Now, there's an article coming out of Investment Watch blog about how Trump's policies threaten the North American Union. Anybody here think that's a bad thing? I don't. And finally, it turns out Donald Trump is a supporter of the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, because he was being castigated by a French magazine, about, look at what's happening and everything. And Trump just came out and said, look, do you think the Paris shootings would have happened if the shooters understood there were probably people out there able to shoot back? And he's absolutely right about that. Now, to nobody's surprise, there has been a study of all these mass shootings and mayhem all across the country. And to nobody's surprise, I don't know why they bothered with the research. Somebody got funding to do this, but they discovered, no kidding, the mass shooters always follow those gun-free zone signs because they want to go and have fun where nobody can shoot back at them. Big shock on that one, right? So Trump is seeing through that nonsense. We're seeing a story coming out of reader-supported news about how the GOP establishment might start looking at the bright side of Trump, that he could keep the White House away from probably Hillary Clinton. I don't think so. I think the GOP establishment are so scared of Trump's being independent, can't be bought, has his own money, they're willing to let Hillary Clinton have the White House rather than let Donald Trump in there. That's my analysis of the situation. I am not optimistic the GOP establishment is going to deal with the reality of Trump's popularity. It just isn't. All righty, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news and commercials, and when we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM Music, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. And what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to talk about an article by Michael Snyder from The Economic Collapse, and it's titled, Global Stocks Meltdown Could Trigger a Cataclysmic, Uncontrollable Backlash. I have a great deal of respect for this guy because he tends to get things right. And what he's reporting is that stock markets around the world continue to collapse as this new global financial crisis picks up more steam. In the U.S., the Dow lost 254 more points on Thursday, and it has now fallen for 5 days in a row. European stocks continue to get obliterated, and financial institutions are leading the way. But this week, what is happening in Japan has been the most sobering. After falling 918 points the other day, the Nikkei plunged another 760 points early on Friday. The Nikkei has now fallen for 7 of the past 8 days, and investors in Japan are in full panic mode.
And everybody understands that the gains over the last 24 hours are the result of machinations by the bankers and the government, their interventions. They don't really reflect a change in the direction of the economy.
No, they don't. And the problem is because this is such a Ponzi scheme, worldwide, it's completely unsustainable, and it's not based on facts, Michael. Not at all.
Yes.
I mean, price-to-earnings ratio, hello. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't. There is no value in the stocks to support the prices. It's just being manipulated so that they've got a banner to wag at the people to convince you the economy is doing great, even though we've got massive unemployment, homelessness, and hunger all across the nation. Yeah. They're just lying to you about things are good, there's a recovery, and look how good the stock market is doing. But the stock market is an illusion. Just like that 4.9% unemployment number. It's a government-crafted hoax.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd kind of like to move into another area that is relative here. Baby boomers, people our age, are drowning in loans. The debt of the average 67-year-old, and I attain that status later this year, soared 169% in the past 12 years. And for those who follow the monthly consumer credit report released by the Fed, there was nothing surprising in today's release of the latest household debt and credit report by the New York Fed. It reports that total household debt rose from $12.12 trillion in quarter four, up from $11.83 trillion a year ago, mostly as a result of soaring student and auto debt, both trends we have observed on various occasions in the recent and not so recent past. And I have to ask you, Mike, is this much debt being carried by our generation really a sign of a healthy economy?
No, it isn't, because, the entire system for the last 100 years, ever since the creation of the Federal Reserve, is create a huge amount of debt and pass it forward onto the next generation. Now, you need to understand that nobody alive today had anything to say about selling the nation back into the slavery of the same kind of predatory banking we fought the revolution to be free of.
Mm-hmm.
The government just tells every new generation of Americans, this is your debt, you will pay it, you have no choice about it. To me, that sounds like slavery.
Yeah. I was very lucky when I went to college. And, of course, way back in the day, the fees were nowhere near as intense as they are now. But my late dad did something extremely kind for me. And he was feeling a lot worse than he was letting on. He passed away, but he had an insurance policy to make sure that all of my college debt would be paid by that insurance policy. And that was really a blessing. But a lot of people, if they're working their way through college and they are assuming this debt, it can get pretty nasty and can last up until our age.
Yes, it can.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just our own personal debt. It's the accumulated debt of the government itself,
yes.
Which the government's attitude is, we're going to borrow it and spend it, and you will work to pay it all off. And you will give us your money, and we will not give you anything back for it. And again, that sounds to me like slavery, because we never had a chance to vote on private central banking.
No.
It was just thrown at us by a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president.
Right.
And they started very slow and small, so the people who did have a say in it back then, it didn't look like it was a big problem. Mm-hmm. But these things always grow. Private central banks always produce more debt than money with which to pay the debt, until that debt crashes the system. And that's really where we are right now.
Yeah.
Between outright bank debt, the derivatives nightmare, everything they've done to try and maximize their profits and hold off the collapse has only made the eventual collapse that much worse.
Yeah.
It should have been allowed to correct back in 2008. And we'd have a good, solid economic foundation today. But the money junkies wanted to go on being money junkies, and the politicians said, there, bankers, we will take care of you. We'll take trillions from the American people and give it to you so you can loan it back to the American people at interest, which is basically all a bailout is taking your money, giving it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to you at interest.
Right.
Sounds like a sweet deal for the banks, and it's definitely not for the American people.
No, it isn't. I kind of like to bop on over to one of the other interesting and ironic aspects of the most transparent administration in history.
Okay.
Obama keeps public in the dark about black budget requests. Disclosing any agency-specific information, such as whether the controversial National Security Agency or lesser-known National Reconnaissance Office won backing for a raise or a cut, could harm national security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said on Tuesday on a press conference. The Obama administration has been resisting releasing the agency-specific requests, despite a sustained campaign following whistleblower Edward Snowden's 2013 disclosures about mass surveillance, making continued non-disclosure no surprise. Well, I'm not shocked. Biggest brother dearest, President Obama doesn't want this information known because these budgets are many times used and engineered for massive government destabilization abroad to attempt to establish governments more toward the U.S. government's liking.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's the game they've been playing since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Okay, if the country doesn't do what we tell it to, we'll change the government or we'll declare war on them.
Regime change.
And they got away with it for a lot of decades because the people in the United States and the people in the targeted countries didn't understand that was what was going on. They bought the idea that there was a genuine grassroots revolution that kicked out this politician and put in somebody else. But now, of course, we have the CIA admitting they overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and Chile. They kicked out Allende. And they put in these dictators, Pinochet and the Shah, because Pinochet and the Shah were going to run their countries for the benefit of American corporations and not for their own people.
Right.
And everybody knows that's what's been going on.
Yeah. I would like to look at the situation very quickly in Syria. We may have to keep this over to the next section.
Okay.
But the U.S. is saying that it has won the Saudi air campaign commitment against the Islamic State. Now, U.S. Secretary Ash Carter, who has been under pressure to shore up support from Sunni Arab allies to fight the Islamic State group, on Thursday welcomed a commitment from Saudi Arabia to expand its role in the airstrikes against the Sunni militants. At a gathering of more than 24 defense ministers at NATO headquarters, Saudi Arabia, which has quietly resumed its participation in airstrikes in the last few weeks, also renewed the possibility of sending ground forces into Syria.
Well, they've only got about a week to do it because that's when they're going to start talking about a permanent ceasefire.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the reason that John Kerry went along with Lavrov about this ceasefire is knowing that Saudi Arabia, acting as a U.S. proxy, like they did down in Yemen, is going to go in and start a ground war in Syria, and then all bets for the ceasefire are off, and the U.S. gets to say, wasn't our idea. This is Turkey and Saudi Arabia doing. We have to go in and help them, but really they're the bad guy.
And Mike, I don't know what the Vegas odds on this are, but I have to wonder.
Hold that thought. We'll come back to the Vegas odds after these words.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, you were talking about the odds in Las Vegas.
On when do Saudi airstrikes against alleged jihadis in Syria morph into a ground invasion by either Saudi Arabia or Turkey? I'd like SecDef Carter to answer that for me. I'm very concerned.
Again, the U.S. government is trying to pretend that this is not their doing, just like they tried to do in Yemen. Oh, this is all Saudi Arabia. We've got nothing to do with this, even though they're giving the money and the weapons.
Yeah.
So, no, the official U.S. position is we want a ceasefire. We're working together with Russia, but gosh darn, the Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they just spoiled it, and they've started a ground war, and we have to go in and help our friends.
Because at that point, Russia is going to have to follow through on what both Medvedev and Putin have promised and attack those troops on the ground in Syria. Now, NATO does have Turkey as a member.
Yes.
And it can invoke Article 5 of the NATO agreement, meaning one for all for one. If one member gets attacked, everyone goes in there and attacks the party that was attacking the NATO member.
Nobody's attacking Turkey, unfortunately. Everybody's attacking Syria. But
at the moment,
NATO has already come on in and said that they're going to join the anti-terror coalition being led by the United States. So NATO is now part of this giant military force to enforce the will of the money junkies on the planet.
Yeah, this is going to be a slow-mo train wreck, which may ultimately be devastating not only for the region, but the entire world. I mean, it's impossible for me to see that the entire world will not be dragged into this.
Well, that's the whole point of a world war, to get everybody in there, plunge them all into debt to the private central bankers, blow everything up, and then loan them the money to rebuild. And it is a scam that they have repeated over and over and over again. Start a war, loan everybody the money to fight the war. When the war is over, loan them money to rebuild everything that was destroyed. And when it's all done, ordinary people like you and I sort of have what we had before it all started, except our graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're back being debt slaves to the bankers for another 100 years.
Yeah, it's scary. I'd like to talk about something that the Russian leadership mentioned a couple of days ago about the possible deployment of air defense systems in South Korea. The Russian Foreign Ministry on Wednesday expressed concerns over possible deployment of U.S. missile defense systems in South Korea. And the statement read, the emergence of elements of the U.S. global missile defense system in the region, characterized by a rather difficult security situation, that's putting it mildly, could provoke an arms race in Northeast Asia and will further complicate the solution of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula.
You know, I remember it was only a few years ago.
Yeah.
North and South Korea were talking seriously about reunification like Germany had done.
Yeah.
And who went in there and said, no, you don't want to do that. These people hate you. They're going to eat your babies and stuff. Was the United States. Because the United States, and especially our military-industrial complex, they make their money off of hate and fear and war and suffering and death. And that's it. That's what they do. And so people can get together and decide they want peace.
Yeah.
Okay, but everybody has to agree to peace. It only takes one country or individual with a vested financial motive of soaking their own people for more money for weapons development to keep the wars going. And again, as I said earlier in the show, the world understands who the aggressor nation is in this new world war. And it's not Russia, and it's not China, it's not even North Korea. It is the United States of America. And I know a lot of Americans are very unhappy about that. They don't want to acknowledge it. But you'd better face up to what's really going on, because ultimately, your financial well-being and the life and limb of your child are on the line if these wars go any further.
And I've noticed today, Michael, and I think you mentioned it earlier, the U.S. government has just signed off on more sanctions against North Korea today.
Yes.
And from my perspective, it is one of the most ham-fistedly, pig-headedly wrong approaches that could be done, and it will do nothing to ratchet down the tension, nor will the introduction of U.S. global missile defense systems in South Korea help. Now,
no, they're trying to ratchet it up. I mean, the United States already does not do business with North Korea.
Yeah.
It's not like the sanctions are really going to change anything. It's just trying to piss off North Korea's leadership to get them to do something overt where Washington, D.C. can say, aha, see what North Korea did. The war is on again. Huzzah, huzzah.
And I have a suggestion for Chinese President Xi Jinping. I don't know how many Chinese-speaking people listen to this show, but I would urge very respectfully for the Chinese president to arrange for a four-party negotiations between the U.S., China, South Korea, and North Korea to replace the armistice between North and South Korea, which has existed over 60 years and is only a cessation of violence. It's not a peace treaty.
The Korean War never officially ended here, and it's a great idea, except the U.S., if they show up at all, is going to show up to put the kibosh on it, the way that Kerry was trying very hard to wreck this ceasefire in Syria, which is why Lavrov looked so disgusted with him.
Yes.
And again, they don't want peace. And a good illustration of that is the fact that we've now had this P5+1 deal with Iran, where Iran is playing by the rules and sanctions would be lifted and their oil's going onto the market. Egypt is out there saying, okay, the next step is let's have a nuclear-free Middle East. We all know who they're talking about.
Yep.
But the U.S. Congress is now passing new sanctions against Iran for things that were completely unrelated to their nuclear technology. Oh, they've got this rocket. We're going to sanction them. They've got these jeeps. We're going to sanction them for that. It's punishing Iran, trying to goad Iran into doing something overt that the U.S. can seize as a doorway to another war.
Yeah, it's kind of awful out there. And Obama made a very interesting observation yesterday. He said strange things happen when voters are scared. Yesterday he made the statement, strange things can happen in politics when voters are scared, and that the angst people are feeling across the country is finding a voice in both the Republican and Democratic parties. And then he talked about all the economic and other progress that had gone forward under his watch. Mr. President, forgive me, sir, but to what economic and other progress do you allude?
Well, the CEOs of all of Wall Street are doing really good. I mean, their pay and bonuses have gone up 3, 4, 5 times. You know, that's a major success because they're funding the political campaigns. And Obama doesn't care what's happening to your standard of living because you can't contribute enough to his campaign.
Yeah, irrelevant.
Yeah.
The real unemployment numbers that have been spewed forth by the Department of Labor are absolute jokes. The real numbers are close to 33% out of work, considering that over 100 million people cannot find jobs, and many of them have given up looking. The corporate offshoring, outsourcing of American jobs continues, with no relief in sight. And as I type this, Carrier Air Conditioner Corporation is relocating from Indiana to Mexico, leaving over 1,400 jobless.
Now, the good news here is Donald Trump came on out and said the government's official unemployment number is a joke, and that's another reason we like him. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you wanted to continue on this topic.
Yes, I did, about Obama's statement about progress that has been made. People like the people who have been working for Carrier Air Conditioning Corporation, which is relocating, are angry, and they have every right to their anger, because the only jobs available when the big companies outsource are minimum wage jobs and a complete contraction of people's standards of living. And I think many Americans would like to ask President Obama if he sees the complete and utter destruction of America's middle class through this process, progress. It's an interesting question.
Well, he does in two contexts, okay? Every tyrannical state tries to erase the middle class in their own country because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy will arise. That was true for the American Revolution, was true for the French Revolution. The reason the Soviet Union perpetuated as long as they did is their entire economic system designed out the middle class right from the start. The other issue, of course, is that Obama is very much on board of this New World Order single global government, and before they can drop the borders, everybody in every country, whether it's the United States or Europe, their standard of living has to be driven down to the same level as the rest of the third world, so that we won't have the situation that we're seeing in Europe, where everybody is taking advantage of the open borders to flood into where they think they're going to get all kinds of free goodies.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, looking at what's going on in Europe and looking at the anger building here in the United States over the illegal immigrant problem, I think they were rushing this agenda forward because they're aware that people are waking up. But I think they moved too quickly, and that's why it's backflashing. It's triggering all these nationalist surges in countries, the Pegida movement all across Europe. People don't want to have what they have grown up with in terms of culture just yanked away from them, in order to turn them into this massless or this mass of formless workers with no strong sense of an identity to make them easier to control.
Do we have a caller on the line?
We have one who's calling in, but we don't have his name or subject anyone, so keep on talking, and I will tell you when we're going to take a phone call.
All right.
Okay.
Also, this
boss, me got buttons.
Yes,
okay,
dear.
talk.
Okay. Yes, dear. The world is a far more dangerous place than when President Obama took the oath of office in January 2009.
Yes.
The situation in Afghanistan continues to fester. The U.S. and NATO intervention in Libya, coupled with the assassination of Gaddafi, have made the country a powder keg with two separate governments which will not talk to each other. The Ukraine is about to fall into an economic abyss thanks to the U.S. and NATO-sponsored putsch, which put Poroshenko into power. Iraq is convulsing courtesy of continued U.S. intervention and the U.S. training and supplying of ISIS. Syria is in the throes of a civil war courtesy of U.S. intervention to oust al-Assad. Russia has intervened and gotten many of the jihadis out.
They didn't intervene.
They were invited.
Yes, Syria.
On invitation.
Yeah, Syria asked for Russia's help, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
Russia did.
Yeah.
And what's really kind of interesting here is the aftermath of every single U.S. intervention is always terrible for the people of the nation. It's good for the money junkies, but if you're plundering a nation for its wealth and its resources, obviously that cannot help but to drive the standard of living for the indigenous population down. And it's a repeating pattern since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And this is why the world hates the United States government, because they're just, money junkies are us.
Yes.
All right, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call. This will be our last phone call for today. We're going to talk to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, two things. One, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is happening there today with Wall Street going up over 300 points? Top of that, what do you think is going on with oil going up? Do you think that's just a temporary thing or what? The other thing I want to tell you about is I was just watching Fox News, Brett Baer Hour, whatever it's called, and found out live. They had some British guy, actually, I thought with a British accent, saying that Russia's killed more civilians in their bombing campaign than all the others who the terrorists combined. Out and out lies.
Yeah, that's what they get the money for. Those talking heads on TV are paid millions of dollars a year to be very convincing liars. Look at Brian Williams, got caught flat out lying didn't get fired, had to take a $2 million per year pay cut. Poor Brian, he's down to only $8 million a year. But that's why they're, they find these people, they've made a decision, I will say what I'm told to say because I'm going to get huge amounts of money for it, and they're perfectly comfortable with that, and that's what they're paid to do, whether it's on Fox or CNN or the rest of it. And they're trying to push this idea. I'm sorry?
Don't they understand that we the people aren't buying this stuff anymore? I read the comments a lot of times on the internet and all that, and less people are buying that crap, especially when it comes to things like Russia. People are realizing Russia is not the bad guy anymore. Look at that. The head of the Eastern Orthodox Church is now meeting with the Pope.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what they want,
Well, this is all that they've done for decades and decades, whether it's the government lying to you or the corporate media lying to you, the prostitutes and the correspondents. That's what they do. It's all they know how to do. And they can't think of anything else to do that wouldn't result in them collapsing the government and losing their phony baloney corporate media jobs, which is happening anyway because audience share of the corporate media is in decline. The ad revenues are going away. And their political sponsors understand these companies are not able to control the minds of America anymore. And that is leading to a big crash there. Now, going on back to what you said about Wall Street, because we're almost at the commercial break. What happened to the stock market today is predictable. It's called the Plunge Protection Team, and they're just rigging the market by getting lots and lots of instantly created money from the Federal Reserve, and they're buying up stocks to increase the demand and drive the stock prices up. Now, the underlying value of the stocks is not increasing. This is a very heavily overvalued market, more so than it was in 1929. But they're doing this, and they've been doing this since Bill Clinton's term in the White House, so that they've got a banner to wag at you. They'll wag those stock markets at you and say, see, the economy is doing just great, so if you're going hungry and homeless and you've lost your job and everything, it's really your fault just because you're lazy. You're not, those 100 million Americans who can't find a job, they just quit looking. They're being lazy. They want to live on public assistance. And it's always blame the victims with these people in government, because politicians, as a category of subhuman creature, are always going to take credit for anything good that happens, even if they had nothing to do with it, and they're always going to find somebody else to drop the blame on for their own mistakes and goofs. That's how they get to be politicians.
Well, what do you think's happening with the oil? I mean, they were almost like cheerleading it. Oh, the oil's gone.
Well, the oil prices were driven up with the expectation that OPEC is actually going to start limiting their production. And this, of course, is going to allow those nations who are not limiting their production to sell more of their oil at the higher prices. This is actually going to work in Russia's favor.
What about Iran? Do you think Iran is going to be...
Yeah, Iran, If the oil prices go back up, Russia's going to do good, Iran's going to do good. Is Iran in OPEC? That's the big question. I think they're part of OPEC, so they're going to have to abide by the limitations. But it's probably not going to be an issue for them because they've only gotten back to about half the delivery that they were doing before the sanctions. So I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on them. But again, it just shows you it's all being manipulated to maximize profits. We're not following the law of supply and demand. We're following the law of let's rig this to sell our products for the most money we can get out of the public. And that's fascism.
Absolutely. It comes down to country. I wouldn't blame this country if we started nationalizing our own oil, if that's the case. If they're going to try to just make profits out of it. Now, I think they're allowed to sell oil on the international market, which they weren't before. That was part of that agreement, that omnibus agreement.
The current federal government will not nationalize anything. The current federal government is on board of this privatization craze of taking all the public assets of the American people and selling them to private corporations to now rent back to us who paid for the original construction and were the original owners. But when we have a new government, they may change. Certainly we need to nationalize that Federal Reserve. Mark, I need to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday, going into the weekend, and, of course, President's Day on Monday. Claire, what is your next story?
Well, as you know, dear, we tend to rail against many members of government, but there is one lady to whom I need to give what I think is a deserved attaperson, and that's Undersecretary of State Sarah Sewell. This was a speech in Cairo on February 10th, where she simply told the truth about the disturbing situation in President Sisi's Egypt. She said, frankly, we are deeply concerned about the suppression of civil liberties, including societal and government restrictions on freedoms of expression and the press and freedom of assembly and association and academic freedom. But folks, the problem isn't just freedom, or just Egypt in terms of these issues of freedom. The U.S. government routinely props up tin pot dictators around the world, then wonders what the heck went wrong when these governments go under. Sometimes.
Well, that's what they were screaming about in 1979 when the Iranian people finally gave their U.S. puppet, the Shah, the heave-ho. We saw that in Egypt when they finally got together and kicked out Mubarak, and they put in Morsi, and Morsi would not do what he was told, so they sent in covert operatives to get Morsi out and put El-Sisi in.
Yeah.
And, of course, El-Sisi has to be a tyrant and a dictator because he's ruling a population who knows that he is not really a legitimate leader for their country.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Shah in Iran with his secret police, the Savak. Same thing with Pinochet in Chile. Every single intervention by the United States always results in a dictatorship. They'll frock it to look like democracy.
Yep.
Okay, but it's only an illusion. Just like New Hampshire and Hillary and the delegates has showed to America, we're not a democracy anymore. Okay, because when the party machine can overturn the will of the voters, you don't have democracy. You have a manufactured illusion of democracy.
And, you have to remember what President Kennedy said. When peaceful revolution is impossible, violent revolution is inevitable.
Well, I would like to avoid that, but I understand how angry people are. I see it in the emails. I've heard it in some of the phone calls. The rage is building, and a rage long in building is equally long in cooling.
Right. And at the end of this article, I said, we need to take a look in the mirror at suppressions of freedom. It is a profoundly disturbing image we see when unarmed Americans are assassinated and wounded by police, when peaceful demonstrators are hit with tear gas and rubber bullets in this country, when torture is being utilized against prisoners of war at Gitmo, and you can't call the NG...
And in Chicago, at that center, they were torturing prisoners to get convenient confessions.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this country has morphed into a creature I barely recognize at this point in time. We have been steeped in a war culture where hard-won, good-faith negotiations are shunned and avoided like the plague. We're haunted by deep state surveillance and the suppression of most fundamental liberties. America is no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave. With precious few exceptions, it has become the land of the surveilled and the home of the cowed. I mean, I don't know how else to say this.
And plundered. We're being plundered by government, by corporations, with all this ridiculous nonsense about forcing us to buy things we don't really want, like vaccines. But it's all being driven by the need to get more of those little pieces of ink and paper to keep that Ponzi scheme central bank floating along just a little bit longer. I'm sure all these people are going to bed every single night saying, please hold it together until somebody else is in the office and I can duck the blame of history. But they've been doing that for 100 years. They've been kicking that can down the road so much. Right now it looks like an old used gum wrapper.
Yeah. And speaking of corruption, I'd like to talk about America's corrupt media, how reporters took direct orders, let me say that again, direct orders from Hillary Clinton's staff. So if you really want to know how weak Hillary Clinton is as a candidate, you merely have to appreciate that the U.S. media essentially acts as her own PR firm, yet the public recognizes her as a dishonest crook.
Well, like I said earlier today, NBC actually ran a lower third describing Hillary Clinton as the Democratic front runner, which she is not.
No.
She tied in Iowa. She got her clock cleaned in New Hampshire, even though she stole most of the delegates.
Yep.
And that's what the corporate media does. The corporate media are a bunch of paid liars to convince you to buy the new car, to buy the new policy, to buy the new tax, to buy the new war, and to buy the new president.
And it gets better, because earlier this week we learned from Gawker that at least one U.S. reporter traded content of his article for information from Hillary Clinton's staff while she was Secretary of State. In what is an almost hard-to-believe exchange, not for me, Mark Umbinder of The Atlantic agreed to insert specific words and imagery into his article in return for a copy of Hillary Clinton's speech that was upcoming at the Council on Foreign Relations. And, Mike, this is why we can no longer trust corporate correspondents or newsreaders to tell us anything that vaguely approximates the truth.
That's not their job.
Yeah, their job these days is to cloak the filth of lies with the exquisitely beautiful silk of predetermined narratives which benefit those for whom they lie, either geopolitically or economically.
It was always thus. Remember at the end of World War II, the CIA did a careful study of how the Nazis had effectively used the German media, especially radio. Mm-hmm. Those nationwide synchronized broadcasts were a very, very powerful influence on the German people. Mm-hmm. And the CIA set up a program, which still exists today, called Operation Mockingbird. And the goal of Mockingbird was to make sure that all of the top management in all of the corporate media were CIA assets. And I think one good illustration of how that worked goes back to Roger Morris and Sally Denton, who wrote an article for the Washington Post on the cocaine trafficking that had been taking place during Iran-Contra. Much of the information came from documents recovered from CIA drug pilot Barry Seal. And they took it into the Washington Post. The lawyers fact-checked it. And the lawyers at the Washington Post came back and said, this story is solid. It happened. This is the truth. We need to report it. The story was killed by the Washington Post managing editor, Bob Kaiser, who wouldn't even face up to Roger and Sally. He had his secretary say the story is being killed. And Bob Kaiser was a fellow Skull and Bones alumni with George Bush. And Skull and Bones and the CIA have a very long relationship going back and forth. In fact, it's part of the storyline of the movie The Good Shepherd, which is actually a very good film. And so that's what's going on here. And Sally Denton and Roger Morris eventually had to turn to Penthouse to publish the article and get the story out. And, of course, at that point, the corporate media said, well, if it's in Penthouse, you can't believe that. Just skip over the story about how the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country and look at the naked ladies. That's what you bought the magazine for. You're not fooling us. You're not reading the articles, and you don't read that one.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Where you tend to get more truth is in the independent media these days.
Me?
Yes. And I know some of you have a holiday coming up for President's Day on Monday. Isn't it President's Day on Monday?
President's Day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just please take time to be kind to yourself, kind to your family, kind to your friends. And remember, I think this country can get back on a better track. It cannot with the existing leadership or corporate leadership under which it's under. There has to be some fundamental and monumental changes. But I'm hoping that those changes can be brought about by very peaceful means.
Okay. And remember, on President's Day, if the president comes out of the White House and sees his shadow, we're going to have 6 more weeks of economic disaster.
That was a good one.
I'm sorry. I'm in a very strange space here right now. All right, we've got about a minute left.
Okay.
Is there anything that you can fit in there, or should I just yak?
No, just real quickly. Okay. The federal government is pushing a new plan for home visits of public school children to check on their parents. They're seeking to create a new bureaucracy that would intervene in family life and could even see state-appointed monitors conducting routine home visits to assess a child's well-being.
What they're looking for are parents who are trying to homeschool their kids or say, look, what they're teaching you in school is junk. What they're showing you on TV is junk.
Yeah. And my suggestion is, for people with skills and kids, get out of the country now.
Yeah, if we could, we would have left long before now, but nobody wants us. We're old and used up and smelly, whatever.
I beg your pardon.
Well, I am. Anyway, listen, there's the music. Have a good weekend. Have a good President's Day. We'll be back on Monday here at GCN. And you need to start talking to people who are not plugged in to the independent media and start educating them as to what is really going on with this country, because these are very dangerous times. We could see mushroom clouds right out this window here. We'll be back Monday, and aloha, America.